Once upon a time, in a small town, there was a mischievous boy named Jake. Jake was always getting into trouble and playing pranks on people. One day, he decided to play a prank on his neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, who was known for her love of gardening. Jake snuck into Mrs. Johnson's garden and switched all the labels on her plants, so that the tomatoes were labeled as carrots, the peppers were labeled as onions, and so on. He was giggling to himself, imagining Mrs. Johnson's confusion when she tried to make dinner with her mislabeled vegetables. The next day, Jake was walking down the street when he saw Mrs. Johnson coming toward him. He was about to run away when she stopped him and said, "Jake, I know what you did to my garden, and I have to admit, it was pretty funny. But now it's my turn to play a prank on you." Jake was nervous, wondering what Mrs. Johnson had in store for him. She pulled out a bag of what looked like small, round tomatoes, and said, "These are called tickleberries. When you eat them, they make you laugh uncontrollably for hours." Jake was skeptical but curious, and he decided to try one of the tickleberries. He popped it into his mouth and immediately felt a strange sensation in his throat. Suddenly, he burst out laughing, unable to control himself. Mrs. Johnson joined in the laughter, and soon, everyone on the street was laughing with them. Jake couldn't stop laughing for hours, and even after he finally regained his composure, he found that he couldn't stop giggling for days. From that day on, Jake learned his lesson and never played a prank on Mrs. Johnson again. And every time he walked past her garden, he couldn't help but smile and remember the time he was tricked by the tickleberries.